Welcome to The Hype Within, exploring journeys of authentic leadership and growth. On the show, tech leaders will share their stories of developing their leadership skills and challenges they faced along the way. You'll learn about their approaches to self-reflection and personal growth, and how they've been able to build a foundation of authenticity that has propelled them to success. I'm your host, Hannah Jacover, B2B marketing leader turned leadership and executive coach. Are you ready to get hyped up? Let's dive in. Hello, leaders. Welcome back to The Hype Within. And I am so excited to be here today with somebody who we've been scheduling and rescheduling, and I've been so excited to connect. And she has also been on sabbatical and moving. Like, she is busy in the best of ways. And so I'm amped to finally have this conversation. Who is it with? It is with Gaby Israel Grinberg, who is the Chief Experience Officer and founder at Proofpoint Marketing. Hi, Gaby.
Hi there. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for that awesome intro.
Yes, I'm excited for you to be here. And you had mentioned that you are on a high. You had a win this week, or maybe multiple. And I think we should celebrate that. Let's celebrate that.
Let's celebrate it. All right. Well, a work win for me is that I actually took some time out this week for my own professional development. As a business owner and a leader and a founder, I think we often neglect that we need to grow as well, and that we need coaching and mentorship and learning opportunities. And I know that it's so easy to get in this mode of like, do, execute, like all the things. And I took time out to join the Lattice Resources for Human webinar. It is probably my favorite webinar of all time. Every year I love it, and I love the energy and the learnings and the relationships that are built through this webinar. And I attended, normally I will do one session or two sessions, and then I'll be like, okay, I don't have time for this. But this year I attended almost every single session.
Nice.
And it was 3/4 of my day, which is a big investment. But the sessions were amazing. The keynote speaker was Simon Sinek, and I'm a huge fan of that guy.
Love.
And I came out of there jazzed and pumped and feeling so good, because on one hand, it was so validating to the things that we've built in our culture, which I know we're going to talk about today on the podcast. And then it was also validating for the things that we still have to work on, that we know we have to work on them. And it's good to say, okay, you know what? We know this is an area of opportunity, and other people are recognizing that this is important work that needs to be done. So it was validating on both sides of the coin. So that was a work win for me. And then on a personal note, a lot of people know my story. It's very public, and I share about it on LinkedIn. My daughter was born very premature. She's now a healthy 8-year-old, but she spent 6 months in the NICU, and she had a lot of medical needs as a child and as an infant. And this week, we got to remove her G-tube. A G-tube is a medically implanted device for feeding and nutrition. She was dependent on the tube for many years. We worked very hard with feeding and speech therapy and oral therapy to get her to a place where she can fully sustain herself orally. And it's been a few years now where we haven't used the tube. And doctors are very, very conservative about removing it. So we've been waiting very patiently to have it removed, and it got removed this week, and we are celebrating.
Yes. Oh, that is huge. Oh my gosh, my heart, I just feel love for you and your family. That is huge. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It is a huge burden that has been lifted from our family, and I see my daughter, and she is like a different person. She identified so much of herself with this device, and now I can see that she's just changing into a new person, and it's really amazing.
That's so beautiful. So how do you celebrate on your own?
Well, the day that she got her tube out, she had to go back to, she had her medical appointment in the morning, and then she had to go back to school. But then when we picked her up from school, we took her to her favorite restaurant. We had dinner as a family. It was a Monday night. And my husband and I, we're not heavy drinkers, but we said, you know what? This deserves a glass of wine. This deserves a cocktail. So we had a little alcohol during the week, which is not typical for us. But we're like, nope, we got to celebrate. And we just went all out. We had appetizers and dessert and amazing food. And this was a huge moment for us and for our daughter. And food, being that she was tube fed for so long, food has always been something that we've had to build her confidence around. So it just feels great as a family for us to go to a restaurant and for our daughter to just look at the menu, choose something off the menu for herself and enjoy it and eat it. That was a huge part of our celebration, is celebrating with food and drink.
That's fantastic.
We told her the real celebration is that we're going to plan a trip to Disney World, but that's not happening right away. We got to plan that, and we got to, save up some money for that. But that is the big celebration for her.
Man, talk about gratitude, like the little things, like how we take advantage of that, right? The fact that we can just eat whatever we want and put things in our body and our bodies know what to do with it, right?
Right. Yeah. Spoken like a true medical professional, let me tell you.
Well, I'm super happy for you, and I'll look forward to hearing more about the continued celebrations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I feel like you've already shared so much about yourself and your family, which I know, on LinkedIn, which is how we connected, like you are very transparent and authentic in sharing those things. But maybe you can just give for our listeners a little bit of an intro to yourself and a little bit more about your journey and where you're at today.
Sure. Well, as we mentioned, I'm the Chief Experience Officer and co-founder of Proofpoint Marketing. We are a fully remote, distributed, and flexible B2B marketing consultancy. And we started my husband and I started the company because of our daughter. And this is, public information that we share. She was born 4 months premature. She spent a long time in the hospital. And throughout that journey, my husband and I both had a lot of ups and downs in our career because of navigating the medical needs that our daughter had. And I lost my job actually not shortly after she was born. I was very ill in my pregnancy and I needed to have an emergency C-section. And not even a week after, I'm recovering in the hospital. My daughter is fighting for her life as a micro-preemie in the hospital, and I lose my job.
Wow.
So, talk about insult to injury. And that was very much the beginning of what ended up becoming Proofpoint. Today, we were going through the most difficult point in our lives as a family, as a couple. And we were looking for stability in our career and in our jobs, and we couldn't find that. The one thing that we needed to just be turnkey, easy, and help us through this difficult time was the one thing that was very chaotic and hectic, and a lot of challenges came up from that. And we realized that, okay, you know what? Something's got to change here. Like, we are not the only family that goes through medical needs, and it doesn't have to be the premature birth of your child. It could be any medical need. It could be just having a child normally, right? Having a baby after 9 months. There are a lot of companies today that still are not giving new parents, the opportunities that they need and the resources that they need to show up in both places as a parent and as a professional. So that became the driving force behind Proofpoint, is like, how can we do this better? And my husband also went through some challenges in his work, in his career. And after 2 years of navigating the medical side of our family, the needs with our daughter, and then trying to figure out where that leaves us in our work and in our profession and in our career, we decided that we were going to do something crazy and start a business. And that has been the driving force behind Proofpoint, is being a people-first company. That's our ethos, and doing things differently. experienced a lot of tired and outdated business practices that were not serving us. And we realized like our case is extreme, right? I mean, thank God children, for the most part, children are born 9 months and they come out and they're all healthy. But there are a lot, our case was the extreme where our child was born very premature and had a lot of medical needs. It's not just those fringe cases that were experiencing burnout and experiencing these tired and outdated practices that weren't serving them in their career. So we said, okay, this is what's going to drive us. So today we are, as we have been from the inception, a fully remote, distributed, and flexible company. We work in the B2B space, and we are also building out and carving out this category, if you will, of relationship-led growth. And that has also been a big part of our story is relationships that fuel us in our life and in our career, and how we infuse that into the way that we approach go-to-market strategy and the way that we approach relationships with clients and partners and vendors and with our team. And so all of that goes hand in hand. And it really started with this inception story of our daughter and how she's inspired us.
Yeah, inspired action. I mean, seriously, talk about inspired action. And I think it's so beautiful. It's really like going back to the roots of things, right? Like creating community and resources around what's actually needed for people to thrive, and understanding at the root of that is relationships. You know, like, why are we here on this earth? It's not necessarily to make other people richer, like richer people richer, right? It really is at the core of it, I believe, those relationships and that community building. And it's sad that it often takes a big thing to happen with lots of trauma for people to take that inspired action and to be the ones to lead the charge. I was listening to a video the other day, and it was like a brain study around, I don't know if it's like, I have not fact checked this, but it's like how the CIA knows if you're going to be successful or not. But it had to do with resiliency and trauma and experiencing trauma. And the majority of people that had experienced and moved through trauma in their lives, particularly in childhood, and were showcasing resiliency, ended up being the most successful people that actually took action and made changes and had the biggest impact, which I think is fascinating.
I couldn't agree with that more. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think, the other thing that you hear often is that entrepreneurs are people that had a problem. You have this problem in your life and you want to solve it. And that was the same for us. We had this problem. We experienced workplace norms that were hindering our ability to grow in our career and to be the people that we wanted to be and the parents that we wanted to be. And that was a big problem. Wow. And we started our company pre-pandemic. So it was 2017. And, I know it's hard to think back to the world that existed before 2020. Sometimes I have to remind myself, oh my God, yeah, like there was a different time before this whole pandemic. But if you think back to our workplace norms that have existed, particularly in this country, I will say, I mean, I've had the benefit to travel and experience workplaces in other countries, and it's very different. But here in the United States, the workplace norms were really this unattainable, unachievable, very difficult expectations. And some people thrived, but a lot of toxicity developed because of that. And I often say that there is like this underbelly, dark, sinister, ugly place in the way that we used to work in America. It started, innocently enough, right? I mean, if we think back to, and I'm not an expert here, but if we think back to where our business norms started, it's really like post-World War II, 1950s, and that idea of a nuclear family, and the husband goes to work and the wife stays at home, raises the kids. And then 1960s, there's a revolution of women in the workforce. And during World War II, a lot of women joined the workforce too because men were at war and all this stuff. So a lot of what we know or have known in this country about working stemmed from, all those years ago. And, it's not that it was bad, but the times have changed, and the way that we work needs to change, and the way that we approach equality in the workplace needs to change. The way that we approach our work and our life needs to change. You don't even have to think that far back. I think back to my childhood. I grew up in the 90s. My dad was the sole breadwinner, and he worked very hard. And oftentimes now as an adult, I see the effects of burnout and stress on my dad.
Mm.
And there were no words for those things back then. There were no words, and there was no dialogue around it. So you just lived with it. And oftentimes that stress and that anxiety and that burnout and that PTSD from working in toxic workplaces, well, guess where it ended up? It ended up at home.
Yeah, generational. That's very real.
Yeah. Again, I look back just to my childhood, and now as an adult working in the workforce and building a company that's trying to get away from all those things, I recognize those things in my dad, in a lot of the baby boomer generation, which are, if you are a millennial, those are your parents. Or if you're a Gen Z, they might be your grandparents. But for me, they're my parents. You see the effects of that ugly underbelly of corporate America very clearly in that generation. And then the generation that comes after, the millennials here, like we're saying, no, we grew up with parents that suffered, that went through hell, that had toxic workplaces, that had bosses that didn't give a shit. I mean, there were times that my dad would be called into work on a weekend. There would be times I remember that we had to cancel a family vacation because my dad had to go into work. He had a white collar job. He worked as an engineer. So that also has fueled me in my mission, in my company, in my work, is seeing what the past generations and most closely like my parents went through and what I experienced through them as a child. And when my husband and I decided, crazy thought, hey, you know what, let's start a business, all of that fueled me. This idea of having a positive impact on the families of our employees and having a positive impact to change the way that companies do things. That was part of the genesis of our story. And I told Mike, I said, if we're going to do this, if we're going to build a company, we've got to throw away everything that has ever come into our lives through work and our professions and our career. Throw that playbook out the window, into the garbage, burn the dumpster, set it on fire, because we're not going to do any of that. And that has been a driving force for us, is to not make the same mistakes in our company that a lot of companies fall into, those traps. And look, we have made mistakes. Let me tell you, we make mistakes all the time, but that is part of the culture. That is something that we recognize and have been accepting of. And it's part of the culture ethos here at Proofpoint that, look, mistakes will happen. And if you think about specifically, and I know you have a marketing background, you've worked agency side, the idea when you say, oh, I work at a marketing agency or I own a marketing agency, all of a sudden, I guarantee you there is this idea of what that looks like. And not all of it is good, right? Not all of it is positive. There's a lot of this idea of like churn and burn, burning the midnight oil, working late, working weekends, working nights, and that also this idea of like partying hard. When I first started my career, this was back in Boston, that was my experience of working late nights, working weekends, coming in early mornings, but then partying hard, going out with my friends, drinking, going out with my work buddies, happy hours all the time, drinking, partying. And it was fun. It was like sexy as a 20-something-year-old. But it was also, if I look back on it, there was also a lot of pressure, a lot of unnecessary pressure in my career at that point for very little gain. And we started our agency in our 30s as parents to a child with a medical need. We came off of a very difficult few years as a family. And so our mindset was very different. And our mindset was like, no, we don't want that culture to ever permeate into our culture, into our company. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't drink alcohol, or that if we're celebrating that we don't have some of that stuff to celebrate. Of course we do. But it's a very different mindset, and that's not the reward. The reward is working hard, working well, but having wellness and having space and having time and having boundaries.
Yeah.
And we've found that employees nowadays, regardless of their generation, but most definitely in the Gen Z and millennial generation, is they're not into that. They don't want that culture of like, let's work till we're numb and then let's party and erase that. No, that is also a big part of corporate American culture, recent corporate American culture, that is also part of that ugly underbelly toxic, machine that we are not about.
The motivation is so important to understand. The motivation, the why, the purpose, the passion. I think that is something that leaders need to think more about. And so the fact that you are talking about that and you can see the passion, you can feel the passion, you can clearly see the motivation, I think that that's really important because you took time to really think about that and figure that out. And talk about Simon Sinek, right? Simon Sinek and the Golden Circle, and really understanding that why people don't buy stuff from you because of what it does. It's really that why behind it and the emotional aspect of that. So I think that you've done an incredible job of really aligning yourself. And that's obviously one of the reasons why I want you here today to talk about this. And I'd love to dive into the culture because this is something that you've been very intentional about. And
Yes.
I hear the why, right? But I'm curious, when you think about your culture book. So I read Proofpoint's culture book. It was fantastic. I actually really enjoyed digging into it. But in this culture book, you do, and you mentioned it too, you talk about how you're transforming these tired and outdated workplace norms. So how are you challenging those? And what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it really, I would say more than anything, it's about a mindset. I alluded to this earlier. We didn't want to copy anything else that was out there or repeat the things that we experienced in our career. And I talked a lot about that story of me losing my job. I didn't share this, but Mike's company went bankrupt and he lost his job. And he heard about it in the news, right? I mean, it didn't come from his boss. We heard about it on the news and we're like, oh my God, that's what. And then he goes into work the next day and he's like, yep, I don't have a job. And he didn't get paid. So we talked a lot about the why. I won't go into that, but it really is about a mindset. And the mindset is that we wanted to create something different and new that was not done before and really inspired. And so that's the why, that's the what. It also starts with words. Words are very powerful. And one thing that I have a little pet peeve about is the word human resources. I absolutely hate that terminology. And I get it. I mean, it makes sense. It describes an activity, a department. I get it. But we don't use that word at Proofpoint. The entire HR experience and function is called people experience. And that right there is just, I mean, think about it. If you're working at a company like, I need to go to the human resources department, or I need to talk to the people experience department, which department do you want to talk to, right?
Yeah.
But it's mindset, it's words, it's being deliberate about what you stand for and also being deliberate about what you don't stand for. And so that comes full circle with the culture book. So when we started Proofpoint back in 2017, we did have a culture book and it served us very well up until the point that it didn't. And that was the impetus for us to really think very seriously about our culture, about the culture that we wanted to build and that we were building toward. And the problem that we realized, and I think a lot of leaders have this problem, is that everything is up here. If you're a leader, if you're a business owner, you're working fast, you're doing a million things, 90 miles per hour, right? And everything is up here and you're saying, well, it's here. It makes sense in my head. Like, why doesn't everybody else get it? And that's the problem. Therein lies the problem, is that you can't project the images that are in your head. You can't take a microchip and like plug it in and then just download it in everybody's brains. It really takes thoughtfulness and mindfulness and a lot of what I like to call deep work to take what's in your brain and put it on paper. And that first initial draft of what's in your brain to paper, it looks like a jumbled bowl of spaghetti, right? So then that's where the deep work comes in to say, okay, it makes sense in my head. I'm going to get this on paper, and now I'm going to make sure that it's clear, it's understood by everybody, it's actionable, it's operational, and that it sticks. And so, you mentioned, how are we breaking down tired, outdated business norms? First and foremost, it's the mindset. Second, it's codifying it. It's making sure that it exists outside of your head. And therein comes the culture book. The culture book, for anyone listening, is available on our website to download. It's also featured in my LinkedIn profile. So if you're following me or you want to follow me, right there, you can click on it and download a copy of it. And it's very visible, it's very open, and codifying everything that's in there is a big part of the transformation, because I think a lot of companies and a lot of leaders try to start with the tactics before they have the strategy.
Yeah.
They say things like, let's do half-day Fridays, or let's do 4-day work week. And all of those things are great. They're great tactics, and they're great to support your culture. But if you haven't codified what your culture is, if you haven't taken the time to really spell out the tenets of your culture and the facets of culture, because culture is not one-dimensional. It is multifaceted. I'd like to think of culture as like a diamond. A diamond it says 57 facets in a diamond, and it has different shapes and colors and sizes. And that is your culture. It is precious. It takes time to unearth it. It takes time to polish it. And once you have it, you've got to continuously treat it with love and kindness, and baby it and nurture it and show it off too. Because what good is a diamond if you don't show it off? What good is your culture if you're not singing it from the rooftops?
Yeah.
And that goes both internally and externally. We have a lot of internal mechanisms to celebrate and to recognize our culture. And then on the outside, and this is how we got connected, is we talk about our culture. We showcase the culture book. We call out things that are happening with our teammates, with our company, so that other people can know, wow, this is a diamond out there. We got to look at it. I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but it really starts with mindset, and then the codification. And then you can break down those tired, outdated business norms. And then you can think about all the tactical things that you want to bring into your company that are going to support the mindset and support the culture. But before doing that hard work, throwing random benefits and throwing random let's take a day off here, or it becomes random, and it becomes very haphazard. And then your employees don't know, well, is this something that's happening every year? Is it every month? Is it every week?
Right.
What does this mean for me? And I will say that, even though we did have a culture book back when we first started, it wasn't sufficient enough. It wasn't the version that you see today. And so we were a little bit of this bowl of spaghetti when it came to culture, and a little bit of this, well, we're going to do this time, or we're going to do that time. And then we realized, no, wait a minute. There was one particular moment that helped us realize, wait a minute, this is good, but it needs to be better. And that is what is driving how we're changing the business norms, is by having a really clear strategic guide on what our culture is.
I love all of that. I love the diamond analogy, and commend you on knowing so much about diamonds, 56. I don't know if that's common knowledge or not, but I was like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting fact about diamonds.
I come from a family that we have jewelers.
There it is. I was like, wow, that is very specific.
Yes.
No, I think it's a fantastic analogy. And especially the part about showing it off, right? And talking about it and doing it in a way where you're honoring that it is a precious gem, and that you do it with care. You don't do it frivolously or without being humble. You do it in a very particular way. So, and that's too, like, thinking about bad cultures and people who want to show off their bad cultures, right? Or think about, maybe it's not a diamond, and they're showing it off like it's a diamond, and you're like, hold on a second.
It's a lump of coal, right?
Yeah.
Even a lump of coal can turn into a diamond, but not without the work, not without, the hard work of getting there. So yeah, I totally agree.
So tell me about the involvement of employees in this process and
Yes.
talking about buy-in and feedback. What did that look like?
100%. I love this question. So I mentioned that there was an aha moment for us that pushed us to rethink our culture pillars and really codify it in a very thoughtful way. And that moment, unfortunately, affected everyone in the company. It was we had a bad hire. We had somebody that just wasn't the right fit for our team. And it became a very difficult and toxic environment. The thing that we strive so hard to avoid and work against, it was happening in our company. And that's when I realized, that's when I said to myself, okay, we've got this culture book, we've got the mission, the vision, the values. Like, what is happening? What is not working?
Mm.
And that's what ultimately pushed us to think through this idea of multifaceted and three-dimensional, bringing our culture to more three-dimensional thing. And we had to transition this employee out of the company. And after that, like there were a lot of bruises. There was a lot of work that needed to be done. And we sat together with the team and we said, okay, guys, hard work is coming because we need to repair what's happening. There is a book that I always reference. It's called the No BS Business Book, written by Casey Graham. For those that used to follow Casey, he was a really big voice on LinkedIn. He's since gone dark for a number of years. I don't know why, but he wrote a phenomenal book and I reference it all the time. And it's become sort of my handbook as a business owner. And one of the things that he did in his company is he involved his entire team on coming up with their core values. And then on top of that, he put this matrix together for each core value. There is two columns, and one column on the left says, this is what it looks like when we are practicing this value. And on the right, the column says, this is what it looks like when we are not showing up with this value. And I absolutely loved that. That was kind of the impetus of how we started the culture book. We started with the core values because our mission was pretty damn good. And our mission has been the same since we started our company. And our vision was pretty damn good. Our vision is to break down tired and outdated business stores and create an inspired company. And that has been, with some minor word changes, that has been our vision from the beginning. But our core values needed help because they were just words on a paper. They didn't have this three-dimensional facet to them. And when I read that chapter in Casey's book, I'm like, aha, that is what we need. We need to very clearly operationalize what our values are. It's not enough to have a statement or a paragraph or a word or an icon on your website, because that's really what a lot of companies do have. And again, we fell into that trap as well. We had a word, we had a little paragraph that described it, and we had a little emoji icon that is meant to like illuminate what that value is. But it was not enough and it was not serving us. And so going that extra step of actually saying, here's what it looks like and here's what it doesn't look like, that has been tremendous. And so the exercise that we did was sort of like a mind mapping exercise. We took our team at the time. This was back in 2022, so Q4 of 2022. We paired everyone up and we purposefully put people that don't normally work together to do this exercise because we wanted different ideas to bubble up to the surface. We wanted people that don't typically work together or don't interact as much to do this exercise together. So it was a really good exercise in teamwork and team building as well. And we told everybody, okay, we want everybody to think about the core values that you think are important to Proofpoint that have been here or that maybe are absent and that we need to have them. So step one was a mind map. And we had this virtual whiteboard and we had all these virtual sticky notes and it was color coded. And we just had all these beautiful words and random phrases on the board. Then from there, we started grouping things. So there was a lot of redundancy, and we started grouping things that were similar in nature. And then from there, we started picking out themes because there were parent and there were child, right? This idea of a parent and child, things that were high level themes and other things that were more like definitions or examples of that theme. So it was first the mind map explosion, then the categorization, then creating some hierarchy in this mind map, and then really distilling things down. We had to get ruthless. We had to get very judicious about what was and what wasn't going to be a core value. Because you can't have a million core values. You
Right.
really have to have, I think I read somewhere that between 5 to 7 is sort of like the magic number. And so we currently have 5 core values. But then the hard work came after that, which was making sure that we operationalize those core values. What does it look like when this value is in practice? And what is the opposite? And that is where the hard work came in, because we had to get really clear on words, on definitions, and on how this shows up in the workplace. And so that was the team involvement was the mind mapping exercise, distilling these things into parent and child relationships, coming up with the themes. And then we also had these pairs take a crack at how it looks in that codification of what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. We had everybody take a first pass at it. And I'll tell you that the first pass was good, but it wasn't what you see today. Then I took all of that work. I got to be honest, I spent months, weeks and months going through every sentence, every word, and thinking about how it shows up and what it looks like when it doesn't show up. And it was very important to me that they were two sides of a coin. They had to mirror the good and the bad. And so we had to make sure that everything on both sides of the column, that they laddered back up to that core value, they laddered back up to the parent, and that the children, using this analogy, the good children modeled the behavior that we wanted to see, and the bad children were the things that we wanted to avoid, and that the things that we made sure that our team knew, if these things are happening, that means it's a violation of the core value. That was the first step in coming up with in the redevelopment of our culture book, was the core values. And the biggest challenge for us was that the frameworks that existed, and again, thinking back to our earlier conversation, the frameworks that existed were things that were put together in place 30, 40, 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so we developed this culture pyramid. And the base layer, the bottom layer of the pyramid, starts with core values. And it works its way up to all these other facets within our organization. And every layer builds upon each other, and every layer is dependent on the other. You cannot remove a single layer in this pyramid, otherwise it will crumble. It was very important for us as a husband and wife team that our team and our future team and our clients understood, why do we own this business? Why do we own it? Why are we running it? What does it mean? And we wanted to bring transparency to that. So the very tip of the pyramid is the owner's intent. After that is ethos. And ethos is a word that gets tossed around a lot when you talk about culture. I came across this word, hundreds of times in my research. And I felt that it needed a place in our company. The definition of ethos, it is the characteristic spirit of a culture. And I absolutely loved that definition. And our ethos has always been to be a people-first company. In our first version of the culture book, we didn't know where to put people first. We didn't know where it went. It was like, it was part of the company, but it wasn't a core value. It wasn't part of the mission. It wasn't part of the vision, but it was part of our culture, part of our company. And so with this culture pyramid, we now have a place for ethos. Ethos is right up at the top underneath owner's intent. If somebody asked me today, okay, you have this book, you've got all these things, how can you boil your culture down into one thing? And for me, it's that ethos. It's that we are people first. Everything that we do that cascades under that ladders back to being people first.
Mm-hmm.
And that again goes back to our why of the family trauma that we went through, the difficulty that we had in our career, and this ugly underbelly corporate America that we've talked about is because it wasn't people first, it was profit first.
Yeah.
Or it was manager first, or it was boss first, or it was company first, or if it was client first. There's all these different lenses that you can use in your business. And for us, being people first is the most important lens. And again, that's why it's ethos. That's why it's at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got vision and mission. As I stated before, vision and mission were things that we had nailed down pretty good. So they really didn't change much from the beginning. This next layer is so critical, and that is our strategic brand narrative. We talked a little bit about that earlier, which is the fact that we're building out this category called relationship-led growth. And that layer within our culture is so important. We want our employees and also our clients to work with us because of the way that we approach marketing, because of how we work, and because of our POV on marketing, on this idea of relationship marketing and relationship-led growth. And therefore, it had to go hand in hand with our culture. It is the centermost part of the pyramid, and it's an important part of the culture, is understanding how we work. And I think that is missing in a lot of company cultures today, is that they look at this idea of employer brand and this idea of, well, this is what we do and this is our employer brand, and they treat it as two separate things. Mm-hmm. And they're not. It's one and the same. What you do, how you serve your clients, whether you sell a product or sell a service, that has to ladder back to your culture. They cannot be separate things. And I know that I've experienced that in my career, this dichotomy of employer brand and what we sell to our clients. And we felt that in order to really work here at Proofpoint, in order to get what we do and to be the frontline warriors for our clients, our delivery team, you have to understand what we do and how that plays into our culture. Yeah. So that is the middle layer of the pyramid. And then the next three are really things that I love a lot, which is leadership principles, operating principles, and then the base of the pyramid, which is core values. This is the framework that came out of months and months of research and deep work and mindset work to think about how we bring our culture to life, how we take this lump of coal and turn it into a diamond or build a pyramid, whichever analogy you want to use there.
It's fantastic. It's such a fantastic framework. You can just see the effort and the thoughtfulness that goes into it. I see ties into psychological needs as well. I see ties into Maslow's hierarchy here, as well as I actually like to always reference the indigenous community, the Blackfoot community that he actually stole that from. But you can see ties to that where it is very driven by community and that relationship building and all of the pieces that are built on top of that, and values. I think that foundation of values is critical. I think it was Brandon Redlinger had just had a post on LinkedIn about, he was talking about culture, and I wish I remember who said this. Maybe it's your friend Casey Graham. I don't know. I'll have to look it up. But it was like culture in action. Culture is really the things that you will and will not tolerate. Like, it translates to boundaries when you're thinking about how does that look. So I love that you brought out Casey Graham's framework too, in that of here's how this actually looks. So here are the boundaries. Here's when somebody's crossing the line. Here's when somebody's living within those boundaries, within these guardrails. This is what we will put up with, and this is what we will not put up with. We really wanted to dive into the leadership principles, but I know we don't have enough time, so we'll have to do a part 2 or something. Fantastic. But just to think about tying this together, I'd love to hear just some anecdotes on what the results have been. You've done all this work, months and months of work, both internally with yourself, with your husband, with the team, and have rolled this out, have started to show off that diamond. What are the results implementing this people first ethos?
Yes. Well, we have a saying at Proofpoint that the proof is in the pudding. So I'm really excited to share the pudding. I wrote these down so I wouldn't forget. The impact has been tremendous. So, first and foremost, after we launched the culture book, we had a number of open positions at Proofpoint, and we reduced our time to hire significantly. In the past, it would take us, 60 to 90 days, and we reduced our time to hire down to between 30 and 60 days.
Wow.
So that was huge. The other thing that some people might think, ooh, this is a bad thing, but it's actually a great thing. We did hire an employee. This was a year or two ago. And within the first 30 days, they decided that this wasn't the place for them. And that was a victory because you spend so much time training and mentoring and onboarding a new employee. And if it's not a fit and you keep going, and oftentimes that happens, oftentimes employees will stick around because they feel some sense of responsibility or whatever, or they're afraid to leave because of how it may look on their resume. But we had an employee that after 30 days, he said, look, this is just not for me. You have a great company. I appreciate what you're doing, but it's not for me. And I'm going to be leaving. That was a triumph, honestly. Quite honestly, that was a triumph because having had an employee that unfortunately created some toxic environment for our team, having an employee that said, you know what, I'm leaving. It's not for me. Great. We didn't miss a beat. We offboarded him with grace and with respect. And we just moved on. We kept going because there was this culture in place. There was this framework in place to let people know that, hey, you know what? This didn't work out, but it's a good thing because now we can find the right person for this role, right person, right seat, that sort of thing. The other impact is that our team is really open about their desire to transition. So I have a really great example. Earlier this year, back in January, I had an employee come to me and my husband and say, look, I love Proofpoint. I love my time here. I love what I've built. I love the clients. I love the team, but I'm ready to move on. And I'm moving on because I want to start my own business. With this employee, we had a 6-month runway knowing that he was going to leave. We were able to give our clients ample time to know that this was happening. We gave our employees ample time to know that this would be happening. We had ample time as a business to prepare for his transition. We ended up being able to promote someone from within to fill that role. So that gave us enough time to overlap between the two roles. We had a lot of transition time for training, for mentorship. So being able to have this open dialogue with an employee that says, hey, I'm ready to leave. Here's my notice. Here's 6 weeks, 6 months, 2 months, whatever it is way better than 2 weeks, right? The typical notice cycle is a 2-week cycle. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. As a business owner, I know that not every single employee that works at my company is going to give me that kind of runway of their notice to depart. But the fact that we were able to cultivate that internal culture for this employee to raise his hand and say, hey, I'm looking to move on because I want to start my own business, that's huge.
Yeah.
And that gave our team so much. It was a beautiful moment for our team to see. It was a great opportunity to share with our clients and for them to see, oh, wow, Proofpoint is a good company to work with because if their employees are doing this, they're doing something right. So it was just all around a really good thing. A couple of other examples of the impact is people are speaking their truth and they're not afraid to ask questions or advocate for themselves. I have another employee recently who just had a baby. This is his first child. And very publicly in Slack, he will say things like, hey guys, I didn't have a lot of sleep last night. Baby was up all night. I'm going to take a half day today, or I'm going to finish up my work, finish up my meetings, and then I'm taking time off. I think that a lot of times people are afraid to speak up about things happening in their personal life because they're afraid of how it will look in their career, in their professional life. And the fact that I have employees that are advocating for themselves, that are speaking up, that are saying, I need time, I need to exercise our flexible work policy, I need to exercise our unlimited time off policy. To me, that's the proof, that's the pudding, is that the things that we've put in place, people are actually doing it. People are actually living that value. And then the other thing that I would say, is that people care to work with each other. they're doing what's right for the client, and that when there is a violation of our culture, or a mistake happens, people are not sweeping it under the rug. I have employees that will come very visibly in Slack and will say, hey, we made a mistake, or this happened, or I screwed up, I missed the deadline, it's on me. I can't think of a time in my career where I would have felt comfortable to admit a mistake. Because so often in companies, when you admit a mistake, you are treated like persona non grata. You are branded with the red letter A on your back. And instead of celebrating or recognizing that this employee has been honest and come forth, they get reprimanded, they get pushed down, they get branded as a bad employee. And I've personally experienced that in my career where a mistake was made, not malicious at all, just out of ignorance. 90% of mistakes are out of ignorance, not out of malice, not out of ill intent. When you hold somebody out of ignorance to their mistake and you reprimand them and you make them feel guilty, well, guess what? They're not going to want to share when they make mistakes. They're not going to want to be honest about things. They're going to find ways to cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
And look, a lie is worse than a mistake, right? Covering up, lying, cheating, going behind someone's back is 10 times worse than a mistake. A mistake is an opportunity to learn and do better. A mistake often comes back to the leader, right? If my team makes a mistake, it's because I didn't train them enough. I don't have a policy on that. I didn't bring this to their attention, and that goes back to mindset. What is your mindset as a leader? How are you going to create culture? How are you going to bring it to make this beautiful, multifaceted diamond in your organization? So those are, at a high level, anecdotally, those are some of the impact that I have seen with my team. And that has made a tremendous difference for us as a company.
Yeah, those are fantastic examples and so measurable as well. Even if they are just stories, right? It's still measurable. I think we get hung up on like measurable being numbers and data, but not everything is measurable in that way. There are different ways of measuring. I also wanted to call out too with the framework that the definitions, I think it's so important that you are defining, making everything so clear. You're removing any uncertainty from what it means to be a part of the culture at Proofpoint and what's expected of you and what's not tolerable. And I think that is a huge foundational aspect of building psychological safety. In the stories that you tell, this has clearly created a space where psychological safety is the norm. So to wrap things up, again, we're going to have to do a part 2 because I really want to dive into the leadership principles and some of the like relationship violations because I think that those are fascinating too. But for now, as we wrap up, the question I had written said organizations, but I want to say leaders. What advice would you give to other leaders who are looking and thinking about redeveloping their culture pillars or thinking about what does it mean for us to have a people first ethos? What's your advice for those leaders?
First and foremost, don't go into this thinking that it's gonna take you a week to do. I mean, look, some people, if they can clear their workload and just focus on this, maybe you can get it done in a week or two. But honestly, go into it with the mindset that what you're creating is going to be the foundation. I think a lot of times leaders don't do this hard work up front because it takes time. And then what happens is the culture isn't strong enough. The pillars of your culture are not strong enough to withstand a little earthquake or a little tsunami or a pandemic, right? Because we just went through that. You really have to think that culture is everything. And you've got to spend that time, that deep work time to build it right. That doesn't mean that it can't change or evolve because it can. But if you're having to wreck and rebuild the foundation of your home every couple of years, that is a problem, right? If you're a homeowner and you own a home and your foundation is crumbling, well, then that's not good, right? You don't want to be sinking into the ground. And that's the same analogy that I would give with this pyramid structure is the pyramids of Egypt have lasted, thousands of years because they were built to withstand the test of time. And that is why we built our framework in a pyramid. Also, a fun fact, my dad is from Egypt. So maybe that played a little part into it. My dad has had a big impact on my career. We talked about that earlier in the show. So think about building your culture to withstand the test of time. It's going to take deep work. It's going to take time. And also the thing that we did that has been tremendous is get your team involved. That doesn't mean that they have to do everything, but they should be involved in some of the key areas. And for us, that was coming up with the core values. And then we also tapped our people leaders, those that have subordinates, to help us think through our leadership principles. We didn't really talk about those, but I'm happy to do a part 2. So, do the deep work, build something that's going to last, build the foundation of your home, your work, your business, build it so that it lasts. It's going to take time, and get your team involved. And last but not least, the one other thing that I would add there is that words matter. I love words. I love languages. I had dictionary.com and thesaurus.com up on my tabs for the duration of the time that we spent on the culture book, because I kept scrutinizing over words. I kept wanting to find the right word, the right sentence, the right phrase for the culture book. And that's really important. Even, changing one word can have a totally different meaning in your intent. And so you have to think about your mindset, you have to think about your intent, and you have to find the right word that's going to fit that mindset and that intent. And one word that's off, it's like one brick in a home that's off. Well, if that brick is falling and crumbling, you got to replace that brick, because then the whole structure is going to fall. And that was the same mindset that we had, is that every single word, every core value, every principle, the definitions of those things, we could not have a weak link. We could not have one word or one sentence or one phrase that was off, which is another reason why it took so long. But again, it's that mindset that has served us well. If you're building the culture pyramid for your organization, you got to have all your materials, all your words, all your sentences, all your definitions, that they make up the foundation of your pyramid. So that's what I would say is it's deep work, it's time, it's team involvement, and words matter.
Love it. And clearly it's worth it. The results speak for themselves. Really powerful and insightful. Thank you so much for breaking down the process, for showing what this looks like. I think it's so, so important. And for also sharing the motivation, the why. That is equally as important, for people to really break that open. And I think that requires a lot of work and unlearning from leaders, which not everybody wants to do. They want to jump into the biggest impact with the culture and that shiny diamond, but you've got to start, right? Where do diamonds come from?
Right.
You've got to start there, which I appreciate you showcasing. So Gaby, thank you so much for coming on. Would love to do a part 2 and dig in a little bit more, and just excited to continue to see you out there showing off that diamond and in the most authentic way too, right? Like the how you do it is very important. And I just appreciate us being connected and you sharing today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved being on the show, and we dove into so many great things, and I feel like we didn't leave room for other things, but I'm totally down for a part 2. And I hope that the listeners take some great tips and value from this show. So thank you for having me on.
Yes, I know that they will. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope you walk away with something empowering that you can take into your own leadership journey. Are you a high-performing executive looking to take your career to the next level? Or maybe you're an emerging leader who wants to develop the skills you need to advance in your role and show up authentically. Or maybe you're experiencing burnout and struggling to find a better work-life balance. Whatever your situation is, one-on-one coaching can help you achieve your personal and professional goals. If you're interested in experiencing the power of coaching for yourself, head on over to hypehousecoaching.com/start coaching now, where you can set up a one-on-one leadership and executive coaching intro session for free. Remember, the only hype that really matters is the hype within.